Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Navigating the Strategic Imperatives of Information Management.
Thanks everybody for being here for another AIM webinar, this time with our friends from Access. We're talking about the strategic imperatives and navigating really the future of information management. And it's an important topic because the landscape of information management is changing. Our traditional focus on archiving and compliance and protecting information is expanding. This wider vista views information as more than just data, and instead envisions information as a powerful lever to move organizational performance and digital transformation forward in ways that really matter. According to research done here at AIM, proper information management can lead to a 50% reduction in the time that it takes for organizations to make informed decisions. This provides real competitive advantage. The implementation of effective information management systems can result in annual cost savings of up to 30% through improved efficiency, reduced storage costs, and so forth. This is a real bottom line impact. And one survey from McKinsey & Company found that employees spend nearly 20% of their time simply searching for information. But organizations with efficient information management systems reduce this time wasted, leading to increased employee productivity. All of this makes a difference in ways that really matter. But it's difficult to make a mark in organizational performance if you struggle with the technologies and the techniques and the infrastructure to get it done. So what should information managers do differently in order to effectively map the future of information management and really move the needle in terms of impact, performance, and advantage? Well, that's what we'll learn about today in today's webinar with our guest experts from Access. We'll learn how to seamlessly integrate paper and digital content, ways to achieve data security and compliance in a hybrid environment, the role of digitization in enhancing content accessibility and searchability, and ultimately, strategies that will align with the shifting expectations of our business today. So with that, let me introduce our guest experts from Access, starting with Mike DeCenzo. Mike, are you with us?
I am with you.
Hello, Mike. Mike is Director of Product Marketing at Access. Welcome aboard, Mike. Where are you calling in from?
I am calling in live from tropical Cleveland, Ohio.
Tropical Cleveland. I've been there. In January, it's not so tropical.
Yeah, you spent a week there one day.
That's about right. Joining Mike is Greg Grospich. Greg, are you with us?
I am. Good afternoon.
Hello, Greg. Welcome aboard. Greg is Senior Consultant at Access. Welcome aboard, Mike and Greg. Thank you so much for joining us today. As I mentioned, the landscape of information management is really changing. What should we do about it? Can you give us your perspectives and advice and tell us more about your view of the evolution and the future of information management?
Absolutely. Greg and I have been talking over the last, couple months about, the opportunity to join AIM here on this webinar. And we had the idea to just write questions for each other and, largely spring them on each other during this webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off for Greg. I will note our bios, I believe, are on the webinar page description of this. Greg and I have been in the information and enterprise content management space for one of us a decade longer than the other. You can guess by the gray hair which one is which. So Greg, I got a question for you. Hopefully you're sitting down. It's real close to what Kevin just said. So what, in your experience, like your more recent experience, what opportunities have you seen in the organizations that you've worked with and collaborated with, and how they are attempting to integrate something like legacy paper, because it still exists, legacy paper content with digital formats in today's information management practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think, if I think about it at the highest level, sort of two things come to mind. Probably the biggest challenge and the biggest opportunity, and I think those are aligned a little bit. So, I think if we start with the challenges, just like that sentence, it was probably there's too much stuff, right? There's too much to wrap your arms around. And really the challenge comes into aligning different priorities inside of different departments inside of the organization. And so, we see this, especially if if you're in a small business, just a handful of employees. Even then, we can kind of see some rifts in terms of individual job roles and how they think the information inside of those job roles should be managed. But when you start to get into the larger enterprise, it really becomes a challenge. And I think aligning those departments creates probably a situation where there's really only one solution. And I think it's this idea of a top-down focus. I think as I think back to all the different organizations that I've worked with, the ones that have had the most success, it's been driven off of a top-down approach. Someone in the executive suite has decided that this is something that is important for the organization. It is a priority, and they force that priority down so that everybody is kind of swimming in the same direction. I use the analogy of like a canoe. If you've got two departments and they're rowing in one direction, and you have two departments that are rowing in the other direction, that canoe is just going to kind of spin in circles. And I think in order for you to really move forward with any set of plans, you have to all be moving in the same direction. And generally, I've seen that only working as a result of a top-down focus. Now, when we talk about opportunity, I think we're in a unique time where the technology is finally starting to catch up, and it's maybe a little odd to talk about technology and paper together in the same sentence, but really, you brought up a great point. We still have paper, some industries more than others, but there's still a lot of paper. And I think that what everyone should be striving for is this idea of a federated view of all content, both legacy physical and legacy digital, in one place. The ability to go, it doesn't matter if it happened 20 years ago, if it happened 20 days ago, but I know where I can find that content. And the only way to do that really is with a federated view, or a view where it's very clear that I'm going to one place and maybe I'm pointed to the right direction on where to go find whatever it is that I'm looking for. And that goes both for folks that are, sort of interacting with the content on a daily basis, but also for sort of the analytics and reporting that are happening for larger decisions that are being made. Any follow-ups, Mike, or is it my turn to kind of fire one at you?
I was going to say, can you give me a very specific example?
I can. Yep. So my question for you is, I will give you an example. So I worked with an organization, a large organization in the telecom industry. This is probably 5-6 years ago now. And they had a very specific challenge. This challenge was that they had content going back well over 100 years. And it was important content. It was content that allowed them to continue to do business on certain blocks, in certain buildings, on certain telephones, et cetera. That content was still on paper. And so while this organization was moving at hyperspeed digitally, they were committed to digital a long time ago. This was one of those things where, when they gave you the we'll be there in, 7 days to 7 years timeframe, it was because they didn't know if they'd be able to find the content they needed to confirm that, in fact, they were legal to put their stuff on that particular pole or whatever. And so that organization created a centralized hub. So it's not only this old content that was required, all the digital or all the physical content that they had converted to digital, and then OCR'd and then, crawled over using AI to ensure that they knew what they needed. They then mapped it. And so they were bringing all their digital information and overlaying it on top of that old physical in one hub. And so they did have that federated view. So when you did call and say, hey, I need X, Y, and Z service done, they could go into one system, do one search, and find every piece of information they needed, thereby speeding up that process by weeks, if not more. So there's your very, very specific example.
And then if you could flash that company's logo on the screen, that'd be great.
So considering the evolution of information management, Mike, what's the pivotal role that information is driving organizational performance today? Meaning, like, how is information driving performance of an organization? Is it important? Is it pivotal? Is it not?
I think you kind of hit the suburbs of it actually in your example, right? Because all organizations, companies, and not-for-profits, and bureaus, and governments, and their constituents, it's real hard to make a decision without the information, right? So the thing that I've seen is there's so many systems, right? There was a study, I don't know if I think it was maybe Forbes or something like that, or it might have been Forrester. Uh, the average knowledge worker, which is a blanket term, which I understand, but the average person that uses a computer, the wave of the future, every single day, on average, at least 12 systems, right? And if I think about just joining just this meeting, I used Office, right? To open up the email, to find the link to the meeting request, to then click on a link, to then open up either Chrome or Edge, to then open up Zoom that's installed locally. Just within the last 13 minutes, I used 3 different systems to do a singular task. Now, imagine I'm in sales, or I'm in operations, or I'm in legal or claims or whatever it is, right? So between, like, if you're taking an inventory of all the systems you're clicking through, sometimes they have, single sign-on, sometimes they don't. Sometimes you have multi-authentication. So guess what? You're using another app to then type in another code, like Salesforce and Marketo and Ultipro and Excel and SAP and Concur. Like, it goes on and on and on and on. Each one of those systems has information, number one, to help you get your job done, to do what you need to do. But from an IT perspective, and to go back to what Kevin said at the very top, that operational efficiency, by thinning that hunting and pecking, right? That's paramount to driving that efficiency. And maybe I'm overstating the obvious here. There's a large, I'm going to try to be specific, but I have to edit out what the organization was. There is a large sports organization that legitimately used Outlook as their content management system because Sally emailed Fred something, we think back in February. And that ultimately kind of really was their system of record, even though it went through legal and procurement and, DocuSign and all this, right? So from a finding the information standpoint, we have a problem. So finding it is key. Knowing what it is key, right? So knowing where it is and what it is, solving that problem is paramount to increasing that efficiency. So,
well, and I think, as you kind of started talking about that, it got me thinking, is the information that's being driven from each of those systems equal? And so if I've got a contract coming out of DocuSign, right, or I've got an email coming at 11 o'clock to remind me to do something tomorrow morning,
right,
both corporate information, both subject to certain legal statutes, both in the eyes of the law, important, but in the eyes of actually getting the job done, probably weighted a little bit differently. So how do you kind of square that? How do you take your 37 systems or whatever it is and kind of put them into a hierarchy to say, okay, this is most important, this is least important, or at the very least, I need to be able to do X, Y, and Z with each of these different things?
So let's pause there for a second. So we agree, whether it's an IM that you send me or I send the team or an email, hopefully very few people on this call are using fax machines still, but maybe it's a fax you're using.
Never know.
Right? Do you know, this is a quiz show portion of our webinar, by the way, if you didn't tune into that. Do you know, ballpark, how much information content records will be generated by the end of this year, generated and consumed by the end of this year? Ballpark it.
I think I do, as a matter of fact. It's a big number.
Did you read this report?
It's not even, I did, yeah. It's not even a terabyte, right? It's billions of terabytes, also called a zettabyte or a zettabyte, is that right? And I think it's somewhere in the 1 to 120 range, right?
Yes, you're actually spot on. So it's predicted by the end of this year, 120 zettabytes. I'm sure we'll learn how to pronounce this once Hollywood catches up and we see someone
once we
famous
get there.
say it. Right.
I just learned what a terabyte was, so
I know I sent you that on floppy.
So but I'm betting that's exponential then, right? Like I'm betting if we're at 120 today of all time up till now,
Right.
what's the growth rate for the next year? I'm guessing it'll be something crazy.
Yeah, we're gonna be $1.80 in 2 years, 250 in 4 years, right? That's billions of terabytes.
It
So
starts to bring into question the infrastructure component of it and really the hierarchy that we just discussed. Right? Because as an organization, you can sort of bring that back down to the organizational level. It's fun to kind of think about these big numbers, sort of at the global level. But at the organizational level, they're not that big.
I need to
Go ahead.
apologize to the healthcare providers in the United States. Apparently, they still use facsimiles. I'm just seeing this come in on chat right now. So all
Fair
of
enough.
the large university healthcare conglomerates, I do apologize. Facsimiles, they're perfectly fine. Sorry, continue, Greg.
No, just the thought there is, you bring that back down to the enterprise level, right? And while the numbers aren't as big, they're not the funky words. They're probably still in terabytes. They're still growing at that exponential rate. And so every year, I think about it from like when was the best time to start? It was yesterday, the second best time is today kind of thing. Because as you wait to get a good strategy in place, to get your arms wrapped around the content, every year we're not growing by some clean factor of X. It's exponential growth every single year. And at some point, the infrastructure and the planning is going to be too much to get your arms truly wrapped around to get the entire enterprise picture looked at.
Okay.
Agree? Disagree?
Obviously, I agree. I kind of want to disagree just to have an argument with you in front of company, but I'll agree for now. Okay, so if we're generating all this content, and we talked about all the different silos, I can't click through every folder and every system and see what's there at the rate in which content's being generated.
Yeah, I think that sort of lends itself to this discussion of indexing and really having a good understanding of that content. So, we touched about it a little bit on importance, but along with the importance, it's like, what is it? If it's email from March of 2022, okay, I can probably drill in and find that. That's not something that I'm really probably going to have to find. But if it's a document that serves a really important purpose, like the example I shared earlier, if I don't know what that is in the thing I'm looking for it in, and I don't know how to find it, I'm kind of out of luck, right? Because it exists somewhere. And sometimes the law, and I'm not a lawyer, but sometimes the law says it's enough just for it to be kept safe or here. But it's a whole different thing entirely to be able to find it and actually action on it or use it in a daily basis. So, I think when I sort of talk to customers and we work through these things, like indexing becomes chief, number one, most important thing, understanding what the content is, and then from there, figuring out how to manage it. I've got
Go ahead.
Another question for you, I think. Why don't you go? You got one for me?
Well, I was going to say, so if you've got all this content and we agree we can't find it, I mean, you just laid out the welcome mat and kicked open the front door to talk about AI. Right? I mean, it's faster than us humans. Right? So I think, I don't know, from what I've seen, it's no longer really a nice to have. Right?
No,
I kind
it's a
of think,
requirement.
right. That's sort of where I'm headed is like, if you're not using, at least experimenting with using it for the identification, for the location of, certainly in the information management space and certainly in the IT and the governance fields, you can't not use it at this point.
Well, let's take a step back, maybe, because I think AI is a big sort of nebulous cloud that is often overused. It's today's big data, right? It's what everybody uses to sound like the current hot tech, and to an extent, some of it is. I mean, some of the new advances in AI are absolutely unbelievable. But let's not forget that, like, OCR technology to an extent is AI. Auto foldering inside of your Outlook is AI. Like, so when we talk about it's a nice to have or it's a must have, it is a must have. It's a must have across the board, but I don't want everybody to think I have to go out and hire, a GPT engineer in order to, completely figure out my project. It's more along the lines of, okay, what are the tools that are already available in those 38 systems that are already in place? And how do I best use those tools that are already given to me to start to do that? The cool thing about AI is it's becoming pretty prevalent across the board. So whether it's Google or it's Microsoft or it's any of the big players, Salesforce, if you already have those systems, if you have the sort of top tier vendors inside of your environment already, more than likely you already have access to a suite of AI tools. And I would encourage anybody, at least, again, in my opinion, would encourage anybody to sort of leverage those tools, even as easy as, again, auto foldering. Hey, if we set up and we put, the organization and we require that the organization, leverage auto foldering so that, these 5 types of content get automatically put into a specific mailbox to ensure that we're archiving it and it's available. That's a huge step. Wouldn't you agree?
I think it's massive, right? And so I'm struck at, I shouldn't be distracted by the chat that's going on. I don't know if you're watching it, but we've exploded a fire in the facsimile fan community, specifically in the healthcare space. But combining what we were just talking about there with AI, and we can come back to AI, but previously we're talking about paper still exists, and clearly facsimiles still exists. Again, my apologies to the fax community. I meant no harm by it. That was very ignorant of me. I'm sure you've worked with companies that had both, right? That either have fax, and now there's digital fax, right? Or they use Box or Dropbox for digital files, or there is actual paper. So the records are born paper or born digital. They're coming in these disparate ways. Why is why is it important to, I think I know the answer to that, but why is it important to, and how do organizations access that, right, for these business decisions? If, oh, I got to go log into this account, or I got to log into that account, or maybe it came as an email attachment, right? Where's the symbioses of like that disparateness, I guess is kind of what I'm getting at, because it is, some's legacy, some's still new. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I think it, there's a handful of and of course, like we're sort of talking very generally and broadly here. Yep. Within any specific industry, there are obviously laws and rules that have to be followed and things like that. But I think if you think about it more generally, I think you start at identification. You start at understanding what it is that you have, so that you can make a decision with what to do with it. Does that mean keep it? Does that mean get rid of it? Does that mean make sure that it's available for future use down the road? Whatever. Quality identification is key. And I think, if you take that a step further, we talk about indexing. Now, in like the conversion services world, indexing means one thing. Hey, once I turn it from paper to digital, I identify very clearly what this is. It's no longer in my March financials 2023 box that's on the shelf with Access. It's now a file that I have access to so that I can grab it when I need it. And once I've made it digital, depending on what it is, I'm placing it in the right spot so that not only is it usable and searchable, but it's sort of retained in the way that whatever the regulations are, but also whatever your company's directives are. I then sort of think about it like if we've got our arms wrapped around the indexing, and it's not just paper to digital, but it's the indexing of, again, emails and corporate documents and information coming out of line of business systems, then I focus next on how do I federate my search? How do I make it so that that knowledge worker that you talked about earlier, again, whether it's a fax, whether it's anything else, do I have the ability to not care where it came from, but still find it? And the key to that, I think, is federated search. All right, my turn for the question. So
man.
We previously, or just kind of in the last few minutes, talked about AI, and this, kind of gets into it a little bit. So, from what you've seen in this space, what are companies considering or actively doing to maintain a compliant and secure information management system as it pertains to AI? So, you've got your core systems. Now we're talking about wrapping AI tools around those or in addition to those. What do we have to worry about in terms of compliance and security on the AI side?
Okay. So, it's not super new, right? There are predecessors in the 70s that were talking about neural networks and artificial intelligence. In our world, it's relatively new, right? And we're seeing the commercialization of these tools. Not going to go into those details. I assume we all know that. So I think the challenge that I've seen with companies that I've worked with and talked to and peers in the industry, the challenge is kind of what we've been talking about, is the siloed nature, right? I've got a dev team that's using Trello, and they didn't need IT's approval. They just put it on an Amex because it's whatever, $20 a month. Well, that actually has business information in it. And in fact, super proprietary intellectual property, right? By virtue of, oh, we're working on this project and here's what we're calling this card. That's just one tiny example. So that information's out there. I think the challenge from a governance, like a compliance standpoint, is like, how do you manage like the cross-platform governance, right? Because there are these different systems out there. What I've seen more and more, and I don't know all the names, I'm certain everyone in chat will be screaming out the correct names of other tools I'm not mentioning, but tools like Zapier, right? That will use API layer to connect these various cloud solutions to each other, right? And it's a lot of low code or no code connectors that go, oh, we've got Oracle eBusiness Suite or SAP or what have you, right? So we can start to connect these things to talk together. So what I've seen CIOs and even CTOs talk about is making that connection so it can still stay siloed, but from a governance standpoint, oh, I know what's over here. I know what's over there. This stuff hang on to for 7 years. This stuff my, mortgage underwriting department is using. That should not be on the cloud. We need to bring that in-house or put that on our virtual private cloud. So I'm seeing it go that way, where there's almost an adoption of, okay, got it. Stuff will be siloed, right? If you think about, again, how many Slack messages or Teams messages or emails or even text messages on your cell phone, right, that you send that is on a company cell phone, that's all information that has governance implications and legal implications to it as well, right? No one's going to do insider trading by making a PDF in Word and emailing it to you, right? So that all that stuff falls under this sort of like governance umbrella. So I think the catch up now is kind of identifying, what is secure, right? What is SOC 2 compliant? What is ISO compliant, et cetera? Okay, fine. This department, marketing, you can use Marketo or you can use Marketing Cloud or whatever it happens to be. But as long as we know what's there and we have a connection to it, then we can apply these governance rules and regulations to it. But the thing I'm curious about, as we're adopting these new technologies, or we're saying, okay, you actually can't use that tool. That tool is super insecure, or it was developed by, a country that we have an embargo with, or whatever it happens to be, right? So you have to pull that down and say, no, you've got to use this other tool instead. Or, hey, we're doing this new program. Oh, I'm so going to flip this back to you as a question. I like where I'm going with this. As we're doing these things and saying, you got to do work differently. I know you love the fax machine. Certainly, if you're in the chat on this webinar, you love that we're using WriteFax right now, but you have to use this other thing, or you have to use Box instead of Dropbox, or whatever it is, because it's more compliant, it's safer for our company. How do you, I don't know, manage that, deal with that? get everyone to go, cool, I can't wait to learn yet another thing. Do you have an
Yeah.
example of like when you've seen that?
Oh yeah, all the time. So, back early on in my career, when I was directly selling, large enterprise software, one of the biggest hurdles to a successful project anywhere is user adoption. And I think that speaks to a larger change management thing, right? A larger sort of change management ideology when it comes to, okay, the organization has decided. So at the risk of sounding like a big bureaucrat, I think it's really important to make those decisions. Like you just talked about, hey, if I go buy this $10 a month thing, great, it works, I get to do it, but now it's creating information that from an enterprise perspective creates a challenge unless we're able to connect it into one of those federated hubs that you talked about. So I think the most important thing to focus on as you start to plot out those plans, if I'm sitting there and it's my job to kind of figure out what our wholesale approach is going to be, okay, any of those systems that we're using, doesn't matter if it's paper or digital, doesn't matter where or what department it's sitting in, it's once we make the decision, can we ensure, number one, that we can get our users on board to do it in a way that is secure, that is compliant, that is going to be, that fits our plan. And then number two, does it fit into the larger overall vision that we started pushing down from the top? Does it meet those criteria? I'm kind of reminded of a case study that they did on Whole Foods. I read a long time ago, but this idea that like Whole Foods never struggled to decide who to pick up as a vendor because they had like very clear, we only deal with this and this and this. And it was like, if you didn't meet those three criteria, you weren't going to get on the shelves of Whole Foods. I feel like it's kind of the same approach when it comes to sort of high level planning. It's like, you need to find those 2 or 3 absolutes or North Stars that say, in order for a new content producing thing to get into our ecosystem, it has to meet these requirements. And I think it's got to be, sort of those things you talked about. Does it fit? Does it scale? Does it make sure that it works inside of our thing? But to your specific question about have I seen it? Yes, I've seen organizations make a decision inside of a bubble, create some amount of headache for somebody, spend 7 figures, and in 3 years, you call them and you find out that like, yeah, we're probably still paying that maintenance bill, but we're not real sure. There might be one guy in the corner office that's still kind of using it, but it just fizzled. And the reason it fizzled was because they never really mastered the change management. And then of course the user adoption, which I think is important. So I think, you take this whole discussion that we've had so far over the last 30 minutes, and I think buy-in from the organization is like maybe more important than all the stuff. We talk about AI and all this. Buy-in from the organization, understanding why it's important and making sure that they are compliant has got to be the number one thing. Because if you've got, 10% of that organizational base that's bad apples, they just don't care, they're going to make headaches and ruin it for all. And I think, you really have to kind of focus on that. So it's a good question. Tried to stump me again, and you failed, sir.
I got a couple more, unless you got one for me.
Go for it.
Okay, so you just walked into one of mine, which is great. You can see me opening the bear trap that you're about to walk into. It's gonna be awesome. So you said making sure it's compliant. Okay, GDPR, right? California Consumer Protection Act, rather. Laws on the books in Colorado and Arkansas and Connecticut, and ones in 2024 that are coming that we know in Iowa. And there's laws on the books that are going to be happening in 2025 for compliance and personally identifiable information. What strategies are information management folks like us, what are they doing to ensure that compliance?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think it really depends who you're talking to. Again, sort of, if you're a smaller organization and you kind of, everybody and their families inside the organization, I'm not sure where you draw the line, but let's just say you're a smaller organization, specifically where you operate and where you're creating content in. If it's local, if it's in one state or maybe a handful of states, that's something that, probably is part of somebody's daily role to kind of keep up on that. And there are tools, and I'll get into that. If you're on the other end of the scale and you're a global organization operating in hundreds of countries, this becomes more than a full-time job, right? This becomes not only a massive effort, but it also becomes a massive liability. If ignorance of the law is not, what's the saying? Not knowing the law is not enough to not follow the law. So, I think really what we have to focus on is like, how can we get through that? So there's a couple of options, right? There's always law firms that they specialize in. I would say sort of the broad general answer to that is find a good partner. It can come in two ways. There's law firms. Certainly, I know like Access has a program that kind of makes it easy. It's just an encyclopedia of updates, because I don't think the laws themselves are the challenge. It's knowing that they changed. Right, to your point, there's a new one in Idaho. How would I know this in Cleveland? Like, it's just not something that gets broadcast. So I think you have to have a subscription to an information service, or you have to have an outsourced team or a partner that's helping you through that.
Yeah,
how are we doing on time?
Yeah, we're getting close. I just wanted to point out I am in product marketing, so I will take this opportunity to point out that we here at Access Corporation do have a product that does exactly what you were just describing. But you're right. Like it takes a team of lawyers every day that's looking at 250 countries around the world of what's on the books, what got passed into law. And it's not only, you mentioned countries, I will say, like on the governance aspect, more and more regulations are coming into law, or run by like a governing body in industries, right? So things like oil and gas, right? Exploratory drilling, or insurance, right? We all know, like HIPAA regulations, right? And then when Sarbanes-Oxley happened, that was a big thing as well. So yeah, keeping on top of it, I would agree. You actually hit on all my good bullet points. I had a couple really just mean questions for you, all centered around the facsimile industry. But I have, let me ask you one. We have a little more time for some Q&A. Let me ask you another question. We're going to back out to like the 30,000 foot view. I don't know if you know this or not, but Greg, we're getting older. Did you know that? Were you aware of that fact?
Yeah.
Okay. We're not the spring chickens. We're not the spring chickens we used to be. So I've seen an evolution from my lens. I've seen an evolution in expectations, right? Of information, getting to it, how I get to it, right? Again, I mean, think about it, I got Teams on my phone, right? And there are times where I'll take a meeting from my phone or from my Surface tablet or iPad or the computer. What have you experienced or seen in terms of the experience expectation for information managers or folks that are consumers of enterprise content, information content, over your, how have you seen that change over your 15 years or so in this space?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. As somebody who is significantly younger than you, I would say that my generation, or even younger at this point, because I'm starting to feel old myself. But I mean, I think this idea of raised on iPads is something that's like true, right? We're seeing it a lot in a lot of our clients, where the office is split down the middle, and it's generally age related, and it's not necessarily because they're younger or older. It's just an experience. It's an experiential history. It's like if I grew up and school was on an iPad and all the data was at my fingertips, and I knew from the age of as soon as I could type that I had access to all the world's information. Well, the expectation is that if I sit down to my desk to do a job, it shouldn't take 4 days to find the information that might be stuck in a drawer somewhere in a building that we used to own somewhere. It's this idea that like you have to have a better visibility to it. I think this actually takes us all the way back to the beginning in this idea around sort of a federated view into the company's information. I think everybody benefits from it, whether you're adverse to technology or you're not. The idea that at the very least, everybody across the organization knows where to go to find it. They may not know where it's at, but they at least know where they can go to find it. Think of it kind of as the Google for your company's information. That would be the federated search, right? You go in, you type it in. Hey, it turns out that the information I need is in a box on a shelf with Access from 3 weeks or call it 3 years ago. And then I also need this piece of information that was generated out of one of our line of business applications from 3 days ago. And if I have the ability to go and kind of find that information all at once, I think that is the pinnacle. And I think that's what, most organizations, at least in my opinion, could be working towards. But again, it really boils down to, does that come from the top and is everybody moving in the right direction? I think if you get those things, you'll start to work your way there. And ultimately it'll get to a point where we go back to the old days, right? At the beginning, you had your filing cabinets, you had your paper. That's where all the information was. This is just that we've grown so exponentially, we got to change where that filing cabinet is. And I think that places will get there. So I do think probably maybe time for some Q&A.
Yeah, it's almost my nap time, apparently, since I'm so much older than you here at the Shady Acres Retirement Webinar. Kevin, I've really only kept track of the fax hate in the chat. I'm not sure if you saw some other questions or they came in through the Q&A.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much. We are here with Mike DeCenzo and Greg Grospich from Access. Indeed, gentlemen, we do have some questions coming in from the audience that I do want to try to get to in the time that we have left. A couple of questions about indexing, and I want to maybe combine them. One from Jennifer Holman. How might you be able to identify what or how to index? And Lisa Woodley is asking, once I set up a system to auto index, add tags, so I can add my retention and destruction policies and hook them up to my systems and so forth, how long would it take for the system or such an approach to comb through that? In other words, through terabyte per hour per terabyte. Tell us a little bit more about indexing and some of the implications.
Yeah, so I think, when I think of indexing, I think about it in 2 very distinct lanes. There's sort of the physical world indexing, the paper, and then there's the digital world. On the paper side, what to index or how to index, I think, look, indexing can be an expensive endeavor. And so I think it's important that you have a plan going in. And I think that, we always recommend to our customers, let's index the minimum amount of information that's going to be required to find it. So if a document, for example, or a file has a unique ID, we know what the doc type is, and that's a form of indexing, but generally at a little bit of a higher level. But then inside of the index itself, if I can use that unique ID because I know it's unique to that file and it's nowhere else, well, then at the very minimum, that's what I should grab, is just that unique ID. The rest of the index information is really sort of a cost-benefit analysis. What am I getting by bringing in more information about that file? And if you sit down and you work through that with the folks inside of your organization, you go, well, I don't really need to ever search on those other things or sort based on those other things. Well, then maybe we just stick to that unique information. If this is information that is often sorted such that it can be pulled at for a data project or for reporting, then maybe the idea would be we apply some other data. But again, when we talk about indexing, one of the techniques that is working really well for our customers right now is this idea of finding those unique IDs and then using the data that exists in other systems in the organization to apply the remaining information. So as an example, let's say in healthcare, I can find the MRN or I can find the account number, depending on if you want sort of patient level or visit level, et cetera. And by finding that unique ID, now I can apply first name, last name, date of birth, location they were at, all these other things. And I don't have to manually grab that. I can basically just use some reporting to do that. So that's on the physical side. On the digital side, it gets a little more interesting. So tags are a great idea, especially if you can enforce them throughout the organization. But when we talk about retroactively indexing, leveraging AI, which is what I think the question was relating to in terms of crawling, it's pretty incredible what can be done today with some AI tools. So just a quick example, I just bought the new iPhone and I transferred over my old stuff, and the new iOS that's on the iPhone was running really, really hot for the first couple of weeks. And at first I thought it was a battery. They put a patch out for it and it helped a little bit. But then it turned out that one of the reasons it was so hot and the battery was not lasting as long was because Apple's AI was actually combing through the information to make it searchable. And when you think about searchable on an iPhone, you think of like maybe contact. No. This is anything and everything that relates to a word, a phrase, a keyword, etc. So like on the new iOS, I can go in, pull down to get my normal search, and instead of putting an app in, I can just type in dog. It will have combed through all of my pictures and shown me every picture that has a dog on it. It can go through all of the emails that I have saved in my inbox and show me all of the emails that relate to the word dog. Like anything I want, the iPhone is now completely cataloged from an index perspective. Now, I think it's a little outside of my lane to kind of recommend tools on the sort of enterprise space for that, but they do exist. And the time involved, I think the question included this, is generally great. I mean, it's the size. But I think once you get to a point where you've done the back file, so to speak, you've figured out everything that you currently have, the go forward is almost immediate. There's very
All right, well, gentlemen, I think what you've ignited here with some of the discussion about faxing is just the reality of users today in all industries, especially healthcare and some others. The fact is that we're dealing with a lot of information, tons of it, in all kinds of different formats, both in digital format, in paper format, in fax format, and legacy format. And you're really describing a world where we've indexed this information and it's provided to us in say, a federated way is one way to put it. Who's doing this in the real world? Can you give us an example of one organization that is doing this successfully? What did they do and what have been the results?
Mike, you want to take that? Or you want me to take it?
Oh, look at you teeing me up. Yeah, I can, I'm trying to think of what sort of NDAs and what I'm allowed to quote and not quote. So you're right. They exist, right? Born paper, born digital. There was I'm going to combine actually both topics we were talking about. There was a large bank, let's say, financial institution, whose name everyone would recognize, and massive backlog, right? And then sort of the mentality was, we'll just scan everything, index everything. We need to OCR, we need to ICR, everything. Plus we have this digital content, and using some tools, that might just a few years ago, but using some early AI, much more machine learning, right? As opposed to deep or generative, we're able to get in the proof of concept very, very high accuracy. Oh, we recognize this as an invoice or as a loan document, and started ingesting terabytes of information. And at the end of the proof of concept, so we proved it out. Yes, it can be done. We can put this all into a singular, searchable, federated repository, right? This is absolutely a backfile type situation. But what about day forward? You still have these siloed systems. So that's one tranche that needs to be solved for. The thing where the point at which that organization made a fundamental shift in their technological North Star was when they asked the same question every 3-year-old asks: why? Like, that really was and it sounds simple and basic, but that was the pivotal moment where they said, okay, we have this, but will it actually be used is one part. Like, why are we doing all of this? And do I genuinely need this? Right. And so we're using bleeding edge technology. We're going to future proof our back file. But then to Greg's point earlier, what's the minimum amount we actually need? And it was not a financial decision. It wasn't a time decision. It was a quality of life for the information workers. Do they need to come through? Like, if we only need the needle, hang on to the haystack. Like, we're good. It's right there. So where I've seen success in a very distilled way has been when senior leadership has applied quality critical thinking skills to just ask the right questions. That's sort of where I've seen that work.
All right.
And it was for a multi-billion-dollar international financial organization.
All right. All right. Well, that is it for our session today. We want to thank Mike DeCenzo, Director of Product Marketing at Access, and Greg Grosspitch for being with us, Senior Consultant at Access. Gentlemen, it's been great speaking with you and having you with us today. At this point, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Teresa Rezic. Teresa?
Well, thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
And as Kevin said, thank you very much to Mike and Greg from Access, and very much want to thank Access for underwriting our webinar today. Without the support of our solution providers, AIM wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs. Sorry we didn't get to all of the questions that came in, and thank you for sharing those questions. I will be passing them on to the folks at Access, and so they can still get back with you. One of the things that I mentioned, AIM is very pleased to be able to announce, is that, as you probably heard, AIM 24, it may not be until April of 2024, but it is just around the corner. If you go to aimconference.com, we've just published up to the website the full agenda. We have the list of all of the sessions, who's going to be speaking, what they're going to be speaking about, and as the overall agenda of the conference continues to evolve the extra bells and whistles are still being added to it, but we're very pleased to say that we have the agenda up there. So this gives you a lot of information to go back to your organization to get the budget you need so that you can come to AIM 24. This is the time to request those funds so that you can come to conference, and we definitely want to see you there. It's three wonderful education-filled days, and hopefully we will see you at AIM 24. And so this is the end of our webinar time. Again, thank you very much for your time for joining us today. And thank you to Access. Thank you to Kevin Crane. And for AIM, this is Teresa Rezic, and we will see you with our next event. Have a great afternoon.